All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about the literary term of irony. All right, this one's pretty big and it comes up on a lot of tests, and it's one you probably intuitively know. We just need to make sure you understand the different levels of irony as well. So let's get started, shall we? First off, kind of what is irony? Irony, just in a very general sense, is a surprise. And the way I always tell people to remember it is irony is a clash between what's expected and what occurs. And there's something about actually making that noise I think actually has some value. So I would suggest just remembering irony is a clash between what's expected and what occurs. Irony is a clash between what's expected and what occurs. You think things are going to go one way, they end up going a different way. The tortoise and the hare. You think the hare is going to win, the tortoise wins. How ironic, right? It usually involves some sort of humor, and so even if kids don't understand irony, a lot of their stories and a lot of tales that we tell kids involve irony as well. And then as you get older, the irony becomes a little bit more subtle and a little bit harder to pick up, and I think more complex and more humorous the older we get. So the irony of this sign is that it's a sign on a post that says no posting of signs on public property, which is a good example of irony. And if you don't think that's funny, you don't get what irony is, or you have no sense of humor. All right, the three types of irony, you might want to go ahead and write these down. We have verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. And there's really no good way to take VSD and make them into something that's easy to remember. So versitra, drositver, no, I got nothing. VSD just sounds like a bad disease you can pick up. Verbal irony is when someone says one thing but means another. I think this is probably the easiest form of irony for people to understand, and probably one you use frequently as a teenager, because sarcasm is a big part of verbal irony. So you say one thing, but most people can pick up that you mean something else. And it usually has a negative connotation, such as if you went into your social studies class and you were like, oh, another 10-page essay on the Industrial Revolution? Awesome. All right? You sound like you're excited, but really you mean another thing, which is that you're not excited. And rightfully so, because the Industrial Revolution is boring. All right? Let's say you have another friend and they've kind of taken a new hairstyle, and so you see them and you would also be using verbal irony if you said something like, oh, your new mohawk looks interesting. All right? You say one thing, interesting meaning something good, but you mean something else, as in like, oh, I don't know how your parents let you outside the door this morning. And that's an example of verbal irony being used in a positive way. So it's usually used in a negative way, but it could be used positively. Second form of irony is situational irony. And this is a bigger form of irony where you see something going one way and then it just kind of like veers left and something else completely different happens. So what actually happens is the opposite of what was expected. This is like an M. Night Shyamalan, like, oh my gosh, I didn't think that was happening the whole time. So when a movie has a good surprise ending, so like the famous Star Wars scenes when Luke Skywalker thinks that Darth Vader killed his father, but Darth Vader is his father. And you're watching a video, but I could click that link and go watch that little YouTube video. Go look it up if you haven't seen it. That's part of our culture. An example of situational irony would be if an honors math teacher had failed algebra twice when he or she was in high school. That would be ironic. You wouldn't see that coming. Or if a famous deep sea diver drowns in her own bathtub, that would be kind of an example of situational irony, though also sad. We need more deep sea divers. Or I assume so. I don't even know. Maybe there's too many deep sea divers. We need less. Dramatic irony is our third form. When the audience or the reader knows something, but the character doesn't. All right, I'll say that one again. When the audience or reader knows something that the character doesn't, or that the characters don't. It could be multiple characters. All right, so you're watching your little romance comedy, your rom-com, and Chauncey wrote a love letter to Bertha, but we know that Bertha loves Devon and doesn't even like Chauncey. And so we see Chauncey giving that letter to Bertha, but the irony, or like what gives you that feeling like you know he's going to get crushed, is what makes it such a good scene, because the writer, the director of the show has used dramatic irony in a powerful way. We also see this a lot in like horror movies where like the teenager's like, oh man, we should split up and investigate all these rooms separately. And you're like, no, teenagers, you're stupid, don't do that. And then like one goes into the basement, but we already saw a shot where like the killer was in the basement. So it builds this suspense because you know it's not going to end well. Okay? That's a good example of dramatic irony. So once again, we have verbal, situational, and dramatic irony. And I'd seen this somewhere, and so this works pretty well in most situations. So you might want to write this down too. The first two are pretty good. If the irony is unexpected by a character, it's dramatic irony. If it's unexpected by everyone, including like yourself, it's situational irony. And if it's sarcasm, it's always verbal. And that third one's true, but it does leave out the other part of verbal irony where you kind of use it in a positive sense. But if you can get the first two, then you can probably guess that verbal irony is when you say something and don't, because verbal and saying something is pretty well connected. All right? So I hope that was helpful in understanding irony. And don't go check the basement when you're the only person there. There might be a murderer there. And we need more deep sea divers.